So how should the Prime Minister navigate his way through this provincial impasse? Let's bring back the front bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie are back with us. Tom, I'll start with you on this one. We went through months where premiers collectively were coming out talking about all the things that they had in common, what they wanted to see for the country's economy. This is the first real fight that I've seen in a long time between premiers. And in particular, Premier Eby has very sharp words for Premier Smith. Her rhetoric isn't quite there, but obviously the thing she's pitching, she would know is not going to be entertained by a lot of people who voted for David Eby. How much of a political headache do you think this is for the Prime Minister, especially given the fact that Premier Smith is saying, I want this on the list come November or the Grey Cup when that second tranche of major projects comes out?
Well, I think anyone listening to David Eby's list understands that it's very hard to poke holes in it. It's very solid. And at the same time, Danielle Smith is playing what I would simply call a political game. Last week, she went so far as to say this is basically the end of Canada if we don't get what we want. But what she wants isn't backed by a single private company willing to put up the money to build this thing. The federal government already spent $35 billion of taxpayers' money to build the Trans Mountain pipeline to the West Coast. And now she says, well, she'd like to see another one. But based on what? Other than the simple desire to say that Canada has to work the way that she wants it to work. It has to work when everybody can get together and find a common cause for a project. Right now, the best thing that we could do would be to look east. There is so much demand in Europe for Canadian energy right now. Having a brand new pipeline to the West Coast doesn't make economic sense. If Carney wants to be taken seriously, he should remember what his energy minister said over the weekend. This is an imaginary project being thought up by Danielle Smith. She's put some private companies around a table to draft something, but none of them is willing to put a penny into such a project because it doesn't exist. So I don't think that Carney should be losing too much sleep over this. I thought it was very classy of him to sit down with Danielle Smith as soon as possible, but I don't think this is going anywhere.
Lisa, what do you think?
I'm on the other side of it from Tom, actually the complete other side. I think that what I heard Premier Eby say was there's no real project here. But in his next breath, he said, but this project is so real, it's going to destroy 10,000 jobs in BC. So I feel that he's just putting out, I think, a very strong statement at the beginning. As to the question as to whether or not there's a proponent, there are a lot of projects in this country that started out as a government idea. I'd point to AECL. I'd point to the oil sands themselves. I mean, sometimes you do start the project off by having a government proponent, and then it transfers over into private ownership at some point in time. And then the last point that I would make is the question of whether or not there's a business case. Now, I would just remind people of the geography of oil shipments in the world. Any oil that's coming out of Houston is actually going to be going through the Gulf of Mexico, America, whatever you want to call it, and it's going to be heading in an easterly direction, or it's got to go through the Panama Canal. Canada has this incredible ability to serve the West through our own ports on the west coast of Canada, and it's quite frankly very competitive with what's happening on the United States. The East is served by Houston already. Therefore, making our play in the West makes a whole lot of sense for a pipeline.
Brian, you've sat around the Premier's table. We've spoken for so many years about how many times the premiers were either speaking out against the federal government or at odds with each other. That has largely been, not the case, at least since the threat from Donald Trump started in an economic sense. Why do you think this issue is different, and do you think it will be a challenge for the Prime Minister to navigate?
So let me just start off with the preamble. I think Carney took the momentum of Trump having everybody get together as Canadians, but then also as political leaders, and there's an impetus to work together, and he added to that and basically said, we're going to build some stuff and we're going to get some of your major projects done. So you could certainly feel, I think, I'm not in the room anymore, but I think you could feel the premiers with a lot of goodwill, hoping that this would be the case. They would always come out, I think, very positively when meeting with Carney, but then also saying, we're saying the right things, we're feeling good about this, kind of always putting a little bit of a caveat on it. And look, these types of political fights, Vassha, you're the one that's the best place to tell us how many have happened over the last few months. You see it every night. But yeah, I mean, we've seen lots of those before the sort of Carney administration has come in. So this isn't abnormal. It's maybe new for the last few months. Look, I want to say, Lisa and Tom, I think make both great points. And if you can believe it, I'm going to be a little in the middle where I think for Carney, he simply needs to say, I mean, this just doesn't fit a major project. Like, if you want to put a few $1 million as the province to see if there's a business case, if there's proponents, if other stakeholders are on side that want to be involved, if we want to develop some conditions for this to happen to get to the West Coast, things like that, that could make sense. But the step into saying this is a major project when there's no proponent, one of the conditions of Bill C5, I had the chance to review it, basically says the likelihood, some version of the likelihood of it happening. Well, if there's no proponent, there's no likelihood. So unless the province says we are the proponent, or they say we're just simply trying to build a business case, I think Carney can kind of say, yeah, look, great that you're thinking about this stuff. Doesn't really fit the major project bill, but, you know, go and try to build a business case and get some stakeholders on side.
Yeah, I think he can, Brian's right, Benzie, use it substantively as an out, but politically is a different story, right? Like, I remember at the beginning of all of this, Carney and his ministers kind of getting annoyed whenever the pipeline was brought up, right? As a test point or a litmus test for, what do you mean you're going to be different than the previous government? What do you mean these major projects are going to be a different approach to economic development than the previous government took, right? And they would, but the reason they kept getting asked about, which I think I explained even when I interviewed him, was like, it's because that's the flashpoint, right? That is the political flashpoint of the last 10 years between the West and the East, essentially, or Alberta and Saskatchewan and much of the rest of the country. So even though he might substantively be able to say, like, hey, guys, this doesn't fit the bill for what we outlined in C5, I don't know what that does to quell the politics around it.
Yeah, the politics are tricky. And Vashi, you and I were in Saskatchewan and Saskatoon for the First Minister's meeting, where it was significant. It was a significant win for Danielle Smith that the words bitumen pipeline were in the communique at the end of that meeting. She was very happy with that. Carney was happy to make her happy. And I think everyone was sort of, you know, and remember, David Eby wasn't at that meeting. He was in China on a trade mission. But I mean, there's a lot of domestic politics at play. Danielle Smith is playing to an audience in Alberta. She's talking about, you know, a referendum, and there's a secessionist movement there. I think it's overstated, frankly, and I think she's giving it oxygen, and it's probably not a smart thing to do, but she knows Alberta politics better than I do, and she's about getting reelected, not about anything else. David Eby is playing to his domestic audience. Tom's not wrong. This is his voters are opposed to this pipeline, and he's not wrong in saying that it's fictitious, because it is fictitious. Until there's a private sector proponent, it's a pie in the sky idea. And do taxpayers need to spend, as Tom mentioned, $35 billion on another pipeline? We've already given you one pipeline. Do you need another one? It's a tricky play, but it's all about politics. The problem for Carney is, how good is he at being a politician? I'm still not sold on the fact that he's all things to all people right now, but at some point he's going to have to make decisions that are going to be unpopular with some quarters in the country, and that's going to be tricky for him.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, Tom, it's actually what struck me when this whole major projects thing first came out. The idea that provinces kind of had to, like, submit their projects, right? This idea, like, they're going to pick winners and losers among the provinces. Eventually, you had to think that because you've only got a finite number of projects, you're going to have provinces pitted against each other. It just took a while to get there.
Yeah, I think that's extremely well said. And I don't think that Eby is stretching the truth when he talks about the importance of having First Nations as part of this. Canada is a signatory of the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as is British Columbia, the only province. Northwest Territories is also signed on. That means that you have to look at prior informed consent, and it was already tricky to get Trans Mountain through. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was fought tooth and nail by British Columbia. Trudeau pushed it through, right? And it's there. Before any other government's going to go through with this, you'd have to have a much different ecosystem. You'd have a completely different approach economically, socially, environmentally than what we have now. I honestly do believe that Danielle Smith's playing a bit of a game here. Her terminology last week was so strident about the effect on Canada. It's almost as if I don't get what I want, then Canada is breaking apart and it's not worthwhile. You know what? I come from Quebec, and that stuff is stuff that I've heard my whole political career. If Quebec doesn't get what it wants, the place falls apart. Well, I'm sorry. You know, tell you, it's your football, and if you don't get to be the captain, you won't play, fine. Walk away with your football. But at some point, you got to call that bluff. Otherwise, you don't have a country.
I've got 30 seconds each for Lisa and Brian. Lisa, you first.
You know, if we're going to judge every project on that list as something that doesn't have a private proponent, then there's a number of other ones that are very important to, for example, Nova Scotia Wind West, that actually fall off the list as well. So just because it's a fossil fuel thing, let's just say why this is being said. It's because it's fossil fuel. It's not because it doesn't have a proponent. Don't dress it up any more than you have to say it. Just say it's because it's an oil pipeline and certain people don't want to have an oil pipeline, and call it for what it is, because other projects fall off for exactly the same reasoning as has been given by other panel members.
Brian, last word to you.
Can't speak for the Carney government, but I would say that proponent could very well be a government. Like, in my humble opinion, if the Alberta government is saying that they're going to be the proponent of this pipeline, that's legit to then try to go through the major project. But that's not the impression that I had. It sounded like they just wanted to get things started, and they made the argument that there will be a private sector proponent eventually. So to me, there's sort of two different things. A proponent could be just anybody that's willing to fork over the amount of money for the project to move forward. But look, these are Canadian politics. Certainly, we worked on the Energy East pipeline when I was in government, and we accepted that there were other regions of the country that had things to say about a project that would go in their backyard. That's kind of what Canada is.
Okay, we'll leave it on that note. Thanks, guys. Rob Benzie, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Brian Gallant, our front bench. Appreciate the discussion.